Hey there, and welcome back to my guide series. It has been a while since I have recorded a guide, and it's not for lack of ideas. I do have like a queue of ideas I've come up with over the past few weeks that I'm kind of just waiting until the right opportunity to go over them. But as is usually what happens, there's just been a lot of discussion about one topic in particular that incentivized me to come up with and plan out and then execute on a guide that was completely not on my list at the beginning. And as a guide is something I wasn't really expecting to need to cover, but given the discussion I've seen, I have been compelled to by I think people just need the help with it, experienced and newer players alike. So this guide, we're going to be talking about the new DLC clan, the Wurmkin, and how the heck to use them and how to win with them, and my perspective as someone with a lot of experience playing the game and who plays trying to win every run, and how I approach handling runs that involve Wurmkin. So, as always, the audience for this is typically intended to be people playing at Covenant 25, win streaking with divine victories. So, basically, people playing at the top level. Anything I cover in here will cover and help you if you're just trying to get your crowns in your logbook for the DLC. It will similarly help you if you're just trying to rank up because, you know, from Covenant 1 to Covenant 25, things only get harder. And all of these things I'm going to tell you about now will be perfectly meaningful and helpful early on as well. It's going to bring you up some good habits to be in that will help you approach Wurmkin regardless of the difficulty. So I got this idea for this guy just simply because tons of people ask me a lot about Wurmkin, and I'll talk more about the clan itself in a bit once we get past this intro section. But essentially, I anticipate, what I imagine happens is that people see all the new mechanics and they see the units as they are, and we'll touch on those when we get there. And their initial reaction is that they're clunky, they're difficult, they're slow, they're bad. The initial take I hear from most players is that it's not a good clan, right? They're like, this is not useful, everything's bad, just don't play with it. And yet I pretty strongly disagree with that. So because of my disagreement with kind of that general consensus that I hear, I wanted to put out this guide to hopefully convince folks that, hey, they're actually pretty good. So, as a reminder for anyone just tagging along for the first time on one of my guides, you can leave a comment with your ideas for other guides you'd like me to make. I'm going to be over explaining everything here. So essentially that means be prepared for this to last 45 minutes to an hour and solve these problems. So yeah, kind of sit tight and get your learn ready. Feel free to like the video and subscribe if you want to see more. The metrics that come out of these guides help me decide if more of the guides are helpful or if more of the generic content is helpful. So we'll kind of figure it out from there. So let's start at the top and let's talk about what the Wurmkin are. So the best place to look at this is in the DLC logbook. Let me start by saying that the Wurmkin are a DLC exclusive 6th clan. So you see in the core logbook here from the base game, there is no Wurmkin. And so it goes without saying, but you need the last Divinity in order to play this clan. All right, so great. If you don't have the DLC, you can feel free to watch this and try to get some value out of it. But, one, DLC is worth it. And two, you can't play with any of this stuff until you have it. So let's go ahead and move to the last Divinity's logbook. And you can now see the Wurmkin up here at the top. So you can see their champions. There's not a lot of information here, but this is a decent page so that I can at least explain some stuff for you. So they're notoriously extremely difficult to understand. A lot of folks struggle with it, even experienced players, which is mainly the reason I considered this guide, because if I felt this was purely a beginner's topic, I'd be much less inclined to provide my insight, because in those cases there would be other YouTubers, right? Who I would recommend watching their videos because they're going to just be better if it's strictly a beginner's problem. But it's not. I definitely see good players, veterans of this game with a lot of hours, losing regularly with Wurmkin. Their win rates are so much worse with this clan than others. So yeah, so basically it's like I hear all the time, Wurmkin feels weak. How do I win with them? And I hear this enough, on Reddit or on other social media. It's almost as common as complaints about shop RNG with multi-strike, honestly, since the DLC came out anyway. So, well, in that case, my faithful viewer, that's why you're here. This video is to prove to you that this clan rocks and to give you some lines to victory. I'm going to cover all of the core mechanics of this game and this clan so that you understand what's going on. I'm probably going to pull up a run just to show you what something looks like, and then I'm just going to exit out of the run to get back to the logbook conveniently, and yeah, we'll go from there. So it's not easy to show some of these mechanics up front. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to crack open a run here with Wurmkin. Just default go it up. And we're going to skip everything and hop into a combat. So I'm not going to talk about anything here. Nothing matters. I'm not going to click anything. I guess I'd take a champion upgrade. Sure, why not? It does not matter what I pick. Does not matter what I pick. Sure, and we're just going to go into this combat. So the reason I'm doing this is to showcase the mechanics of this clan. All right, so the first part here, and when you first start a run with Wurmkin, you're going to get pop-ups on your screen that show you a lot of different information. They're going to attempt to do some tutorials for you. And so with the tutorials, we'll try to introduce things like the charged echo mechanic. They'll talk about infusions, things like that. And there's a lot of information there. So the first thing I want to hit on is this thing up in the top left corner here, the worm tooth. So it is this relic. This kind of sets the tone for the whole clan. If you were worried about this clan making sense, trust me, it's not going to. The fact that there has to be a relic to get the mechanics of the clan both communicated to and available to the player should tell you that there's a lot here. What this relic does is it makes your starter clan cards. So in my case, I happen to be Wurmkin default and Exile Stygian. So my foregone powers and my fractures have this purpley border around them. And so that means they're infused. You see they have an extra keyword here that they don't have normally. And if you compare them against their form in the logbook, so if I just go and find foregone power, it doesn't say infused by default, okay? So that infused is added by this relic, and you can see it says that. The other part of this relic, that what it does is it means that one card at random in all card drafts and unit drafts will be infused as well. And like I said, it's random, so it might be a card that you want to be infused, and it might be a card that you don't want to be infused. So yeah, that's kind of the intro to the relic. This is an important core part of the clan. The next part that I want to address is something called charged echoes, and it's the whole reason why I went into a combat here instead of doing this from the main screen like I normally would, because it's really hard to visualize this without some help. So charged echoes are a mechanic that is up here in the top left. So if you hover over floor capacity, you get a little tooltip. Similarly, there's this bar that shows up above space that reads the following. You can add charged echoes, which are those little candy crystal looking things, by playing infused cards. The Wurmkin use charged echoes to power spells and abilities. Your echoes can exceed the little holes here, so you can see these slots. You can have up to 4 of them carry over at the end of a turn, but you could infuse more into the floor, and they'll look different, so you can pick them apart. You could go up to like 5 or 10 or whatever number you want here, and then when you press end turn, it'll drop back down to your maximum. So that's what this mechanic is, and you can interact with this mechanic both from adding more slots to a floor and adding more candies or charged echoes to the floor. The community loves to call them candies, so I may slip up and call them that here and there. So I'm going to pass my turn until the game shows me something useful here. Cool. So I'm not going to play optimally or whatever. I'm just going to play infused cards on a floor to show you what this looks like. Okay? So we'll start by just whatever. We'll kill Mollusk Mage here. It seems reasonable. If I put a Fracture on this floor, you can see the preview, right? You see the preview highlights that one will be flickering in. So I hit this, and now one is here. You'll also notice that there's some special effects, so it looks pretty cool, and that's great news. I can also cast another Foregone Power, add another one, add another one. You'll see that this unit has an ability that interacts with it. I'm not going to go into too much detail here. You know, certainly the champion does something with it as well. That's fine. We'll talk about these later. The important thing is just to understand the actual UI elements here. So that's essentially everything that matters here. Now, I'm not going to play this combat through, and I'm not going to play this run or anything. I'm going to go back to the main menu at this point, which is totally fine with me. I just wanted to show you the UI for that. So the next thing I want to kind of hit on is that there are a lot of units that interact with this, okay? And you can actually saw I had some examples in that run itself, but I want to pull up the logbook, and we'll do it this way so I don't have in-combat music playing the whole time. We go to Wurmkin, we're going to search for what's called an Inspire trigger. So we'll cover these units in greater detail once we get there. For now, I'm just going to be talking about what this trigger does. If I hover over it, you'll see it says, triggers when you gain charged echoes on this floor once per charged echo. It's an important detail because there are ways in this clan to generate multiple echoes in the same action. So you might play a spell, and this spell might ultimately generate you like 3 echoes. And in that case, you would trigger Inspire for each echo. And that is an important distinction between Inspire and Incant. I regularly see that people make the mistake of likening Inspire to a bad Incant, quote unquote. And it couldn't be farther from the truth. Incants and Inspires are different because Inspires can be done from units, right? Because you can have an infused unit. It could be an infused unit with Endless or something like that, and that would not trigger Incant, but it does trigger Inspire. You could also have relics and abilities and things that generate multiple echoes. You can also generate echoes into Relentless from abilities themselves. A champion ability, for instance, has the ability to kind of scale in Relentless with Inspire triggers, which is actually extremely strong. And you can't do that with Incant because you're not playing spells while you're doing Relentless combat, right? So it's very different. The other thing that's worth noting is that Inspire triggers usually start pretty bad in your run. You saw what happened in the previous example when I had that combat up. The Train Stewards are not infused. Your champion is not infused. Your other starter cards are not infused. The only infused cards in your starter deck are your things like Fracture and Foregone Power. And that means your infused card density is not very strong in the beginning of the game. It's not very high. And so you're going to be missing Inspire triggers. This is usually why these builds feel a little weaker early on. And if you lean too heavily into them without planning around that weakness initially, you can die in the first 3 to 5 rings. So either by Daedalus, Talos, or by a good example, like Crystal Cloak or Self-Made Harpy or something. Usually by like ring 6 and beyond, you've managed to cultivate your deck down to a more manageable level and draft enough cards that say infused on them in order to kind of make this better. But that is something that I see people making mistakes on. They rely heavily on charged echoes and they don't generate them very well. So yeah, it's also worth noting that Wurmkin does not have a 2x sort of Inspire trigger relic like Incant. So Incant has Founding Seal, which is absolutely nutty. Of course, everyone knows it. And if you see this with an Incant build, you usually just win right away. Wurmkin does not have anything similar. Instead, Wurmkin has a bunch of relics that generate echoes, which in a lot of ways represent double or triple inspire value, right? And we'll hit on the relics more later, but that distinction matters. So in a lot of ways, Wurmkin relics enable you to sometimes get 3 times inspire triggers, or even up to 4 times, depending on the combos you have. So that is a really important piece of information. So yeah, we'll hit on that in a little bit, but keep in mind that Wurmkin relics in general tend to be nuts, and I value them very highly, and so should you. So the next part that I want to pull up here is that a lot of cards spend charged echoes, and that is from the keyword extract. And you'll see there's a lot of cards in this clan that do this. So I'm going to hover over one of the basic ones so you can see the extract tooltip, but extract essentially says you spend the number of charged echoes. And if you can't spend that many echoes, you cannot play the card. And it's pretty straightforward. So obviously this ranges from extract 1 all the way up to extract 6. You don't see anything higher than that in the game, or at least the base game. And you can see this on spells and units. So it's not just the spell trait, it is units as well. So the extract value from Shiny Shoe, what they do is they typically value a single extract on par with 1 ember. So a lot of cards that would normally cost 1 ember if they were in another clan instead cost extract 1 or something like that. And you can generally imagine that anything that costs higher extract numbers, you might imagine they value it at something like extract 2 or extract 3 or higher and so forth. And so this lets them kind of balance it that way. The truth is that usually it's very easy to charge up a floor sufficiently by the end game without putting much thought into it. Right, we already talked about how you can cultivate your deck down to a lot of inspire triggers with infused cards. And so you're just going to spend resources on cards that are going to give you charged echoes accidentally. And all of these spells that say extract are extremely powerful. Well, most of them. There's a couple duds in here, but almost all of them are just excellent. So virtually every Wurmkin run is going to rely on these powerful cards to win in some form. It's very rare that you're not taking any of them. And we'll hit on them later, but it's worth noting, like, because they're so aggressively costed down, that like the ability to get 10 HP. I'm looking at Echo Infusion in particular. This is a 0 Ember card that says extract 1, give 10 life to a unit. This is crazy. Like, compare this to the Awoken card that does this, right? Cycle of Life. We go into Awoken. Look at this thing. This is 3 Ember for 10 life. And, I guess maybe they value this Spikes 3 or something, but still, get rid of the Spikes 3, and this is basically just 3 Ember exchanged for 1 Echo. So, as you might imagine, it's also a rare card, by the way. This is a rare card compared to Echo Infusion, which is a common. So, very different. Extremely different. And the extract cards are just so aggressively strong. Echo Transfer is another great example. Plus 15 attack with no downside. This is like Razor Sharp Edge, but better. And we all know how good Razor Sharp Edge is. So, these cards can also come with infused on them because of that relic I told you about. So it gets kind of out of control fairly quickly. So this is a core mechanic of Wurmkin as well, and that you'll probably be playing into in some fashion. The other side of Wurmkin, and you're going to hear me talk about this a lot, in that Wurmkin has 2 sides. Wurmkin is going to have the side that creates and interacts with echoes in some form. This could be triggers that generate that trigger whenever you get an echo. This could be ways you spend those echoes. This could be cards that just get stronger with echoes. And then there's the other side, which is the next thing we're going to hit on. And this is the consume side. So there's a lot of cards that consume in Wurmkin, and that isn't surprising, right? Every clan has cards that consume, but Wurmkin has a very unique interaction with these. They have a lot of cards that give you the ability to return consumed spells. They have the ability to interact strongly with consumed spells, and they have the ability to add consume to a lot of spells. Okay, so, you know, some good examples of interacting with these consume triggers is that, you return soul is a good one. Like, you bring a spell card back from your discard pile, you give it a bunch of upgrades, and then you also give it consume. So then essentially you burn a card from your deck, which thins you down, also does other things that interact with consume, and gives you other benefits, all for free. So, like, this is one of the best cards in the game right now, for instance. It's just so amazing. And it's really great for that reason. And then you've also got like Broken Memories here, which says you can return a consumed spell to the top of your draw pile for free. And it is itself consumed. So you can already, if you've played this game a little bit, imagine some shenanigans here. There's another one I want to point out, Wurmkin Etchings. This is essentially Broken Memories, but it returns 5 random consumed spells to the top of your draw pile for 2 Ember. So pretty epic. You can also see some other of the interactions here, like Power of Knowledge, which deals 15 damage to a target enemy for each spell in the consume pile. So the more things you burn, the stronger this gets. There are going to be a lot of interactions like that. And the one that really matters here is Etch. So Etch is a trigger in Wurmkin that reads, and I'll bring it up so you can see it, triggers when a card is consumed on this floor. Okay, you'll notice immediately very few spells or I guess the spell doesn't really count. I'm going to click on unit. Very few units actually have the Etch trigger, and so you're basically only going to lean onto this when you're playing it alongside the champion that focuses on this side of the clan, the etching side, and we'll talk about him next. But suffice it to say that on that side of the clan, you will be able to kind of use these Etch abilities pretty aggressively. And the infusion here, Etch +5 attack, you just get this unit's full power. So yeah, that's more or less what you're going to see here. So the one thing I will say before pretty much anything else is that the two sides of this clan do not interact very well together. There are certainly cases where you can bridge that gap and you can make them interact a little better. A good example of this is I pointed out Return Soul, right? This is a card that gives another card infused to Inspire trigger and also gives it Consume for an Etch trigger. There are cards like this that add some level of interaction between the Consume side and the Echo Manipulation side, but you're gonna find out pretty quickly that they don't play very nice outside of a few niche cases like this. And yeah, that's part of the challenge of this clan. So yeah, that's as much as I'm going to say up front about this clan. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the champions in at least tolerable levels of detail, okay? Because I'll start by saying, if you've watched my Train of Thought series at all, I've already given these kinds of overviews of the two champions, the Spine Chief and the Echowright, on those videos. There are Train of Thought videos that are specifically for those champions. I go into immense depth on each one, something like 15 minutes for each one, maybe a little less. Anyway, I'm not going to spend that much time here. The important kind of thing, though, is that at the time, I wasn't planning on making a full guide for this clan, but here we are, so it's okay. I am going to go briefly over it, and I'm going to kind of introduce it in the context of the greater clan. So, all right, let's talk about Spine Chief. So, like I mentioned, there are two sides of this clan. There's Echo Manipulation and there's Consume Manipulation. Spine Chief is the Echo Manipulation champion, and it's very evident when you look at the abilities it has. The first line, Decayer, has an Inspire trigger, which means that you want to play infused cards on its floor, and it applies Reap to enemy units. This is the first time I'm showing you what Reap is. It is a status effect that is provided by this clan, and it's unique to them. It's kind of like Frostbite, but it multiplies differently. Essentially what it means is that you take the number of Reap stacks on a unit, and you multiply that by the number of charged echoes on the floor. And at the end of a round of not a round, but at the end of the entire combat on that floor, then all of the enemies take that hit. This is important. It's an important distinction because of Relentless. So you know the back and forth in Relentless? Frostbite triggers on each one, right? But Reap only triggers when Relentless combat ends. So that would be like you have a back and forth, your guys die, but you got a lot of Reap onto the boss, and then at the end, after your dudes are dead, then does the boss take that hit from Reap. So it's pretty strong. In general, Reap is extremely powerful against floating bosses. You can kind of overload them and kill them before Relentless pretty quickly with this. And this is also extremely strong into waves. So it's pretty excellent. Now, I'm going to be talking about some winning lines later, so I'm not going to go into excruciating detail here. Suffice it to say, this path is great. The next path is the Corruptor, and you can read this text. It says, friendly units have plus 20 attack per charged echo. And you can see the scaling a little bit, 5, 10, 20. As you might imagine, this is really powerful because you can overload floors with echoes and go to something like 8. And if you just do the math real quick, if you get up to 8 echoes on the floor, you're giving every single unit on the floor 160 attack. That's a big number. That's way more damage than you really need from anything. And if it's like a quick sweeper or something, yeah, you can kind of just win the run with this. So yeah, this is an excellent path, but you see how it's interacting with the number of echoes on the floor. And as you might imagine, the last path is a way to generate echoes. So these other two benefit from echoes either being applied for Inspire or being on the floor for the Corruptor. But the Infector is a path that on strike generates an echo on the floor, and it just gets multi-strike 1 and multi-strike 2 at higher levels. So it just makes a lot of echoes. It's weird because I actually think this is the weakest path, but it's still pretty darn good because you can pair this with Inspire units like Keeper of Echoes or Shardsoul Carver that I mentioned before, or at least showed you them, and they will scale into Relentless. It's usually a very strong Relentless strategy if you have turns if you can survive turns, right? If you daze the boss or something like that. So it's worthwhile. It's good. So I feel like this is good. It's a good complement. It's a decent splash in some cases. You take one rank of the Infector and they will charge themselves to some extent. Like it'll trigger its own Inspire ability. It will trigger its own friendly unit benefit here. But yeah, most of the time these other paths are so strong you kind of want to go all in, but you can make Infector work in niche scenarios. So yeah, that's what Chief is doing. And yeah, that's all I'm going to say there. Now, the other side of the clan is the Echowright. So this is the consume interaction champion. And basically, I'm going to draw your attention to the Repeater, which is very similar to the Broken Memories and Wurmkin Etchings cards I described before, in that it returns consumed spells to your hand. It starts with one consumed spell randomly, and then at rank 3 it goes to 2 random consumed spells and returns them to your hand. So this just lets you cycle your crazy strong consume cards. And just imagine all of the powerful consume cards you have in the base game. And now just imagine bringing them back every turn. It goes out of control very quickly if you set up your consume pile so only excellent cards are being put in it. So you're always getting back the good stuff, basically. And this also works on those Wurmkin Etchings and Broken Memories cards. So you can play consume spells to get back consume spells, and then he brings back those consume spells. And so you can trigger Etch multiple times in a turn very fast. And because Etch triggers are fairly valuable, or at least the best ones are, it's really worthwhile. The best Etch trigger in the game is actually on this champion itself, Echowright over here on the Shellsmith on the left. You can see it gets Etch apply armor to the whole floor that it's on. It's 4, 8, 14. A very popular strategy, and one that you'll see me talk about later, is taking 2 in Shellsmith, 1 in Repeater, so that you can just slam multiple Etches on your turn and just get consume spells back every turn. So you always have a good pile to work with. And then even the Marshlord is fine. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this champion path, but even it has an Etch line where it removes shell from eggs. I haven't explained this, but I'll explain to this more once we get to actual egg units, so you can kind of hear more about how they work. But Suffice it to say, this dude has an Etch trigger and does some stuff, and it summons an egg on its own, so you're always going to have some kind of value there. If you could jam pack another egg on its floor, it's usually pretty excellent. So that is what Shellsmith is doing. This thing, what Echowright rather, is doing. This dude ties together the consume strategies very well. And most notably, when you're playing primary Wurmkin or exile Wurmkin, you're going to be leaning into whatever strategy plays nice with that champion, because the champions are really good, they're just excellent, and you want to lean into what they're good at. So that's pretty much that. The next part of this video that I want to hit on, which I think is really important, is I want to talk about the units themselves. So there's a lot to say here, and there's just a lot to say. We're going to move pretty quickly here because there are a lot of units, and I kind of want to hit on the most important ones and how you should think about each one. So out of the gate, most Wurmkin units look pretty bad, right? We're going to click on uncommon units. I don't want to look at the champions. Most uncommons, the ones you're going to get from banners, look pretty bad out of the gate if you're just thinking about them. Just like purely theoretical. You've got eggs, which are 0/1s. Like, what are these things? These are very fragile. You have to do what to them in order to get them to hatch, quote unquote, and they become other units. So they're delayed units, essentially, and they don't even seem that good at a glance. So it's kind of tricky to see the value there. And then you've got everything else is really expensive. One thing that you'll notice about this clan is it's either going to cost a lot of space, or it's going to cost a lot of ember, or it's going to cost a lot of both. Why? Not really sure. You know, it's really tough. I don't really understand why it is balanced this way, but that is just the fact of it. They are aggressively costed, very aggressive in like the negative direction, just more expensive in some fashion than other clans. So this is definitely a point of challenge for the clan that makes it much harder to play and potentially very frustrating if you're used to the other clans. Some of this might be thematic. They maybe just chose to do this because they wanted the clan to feel different, but it may just be very frustrating in practice. So a good example, and the common example I see is, you know what Siren of the Sea does, right? So I go out of here and I look for Siren. You can see Siren of the Sea, +2/+2 on Incant. It's 1 Ember and 2 Space. Pretty decent stat line to start. Scales really well. We all know that Incant wins games. Cool. This is your Siren of the Sea. Now let's back out, and I want to look at Shardsoul Carver real quick. And, okay, it's +2 attack and +2 armor. So basically the same ability at a glance, but on Inspire instead of Incant. It has a little bit better stats, 1 Ember but 3 Space, which means that you can't do like 2 of them behind a 2 Space champion or something. Well, how do you do this? Why is this thing just bigger than Siren of the Sea? And a lot of people see this and immediately go, oh man, Shardsoul Carver, that guy sucks. It's just a bad Siren of the Sea. And don't let yourself get trapped by that kind of logic, because it's incorrect. Another great example here is if I go back to units in Wurmkin and we look at like Keeper of Echoes. You look at this dude's ability, he's inspiring to apply stats to the floor. Cool. Now he's got okay stats, cool. He's 2 Space, that's reasonable, we can work with that. But he's 2 Ember. Why is he 2 Ember? No one knows. Thanks, Shiny Shoe. I really don't have much to add here, other than we really don't know why it is this way. It simply is. So, okay. I need you to understand that even though these are pretty expensive, like even look at this guy, First of Kin, 3 Space and 3 Ember. Jeez, that's like Demon Fiend levels of size almost, and costing. So, you know, I need you to understand that even though these look bad at a glance, these units are still winning pickups. A run doesn't have to be Founding Seal, Incant Sirens, Soul Guard, out of control, kill the Divinity in 2 rounds levels of strong in order to win the game. Most runs aren't. And these cards, these units, they all get there. So even though they're abnormally expensive, it doesn't mean that you should skip them. They are still very good. So I do want to touch on some of them that are actually just really bad, though. We'll hit on the bad ones first. And I'm going to tell you why very quickly, because we're already at 34 minutes and I don't want this to be too terribly long. So the first unit that I think is fairly bad is Glugsider. So Glugsider is one of the rare units in the clan, and you'll notice that this is kind of a trend. The rare units in this clan are not very great compared to other clans. It's just kind of the way it is, sadly. Glugsider is the only unit that has an extract ability, which means you have to have 4 echoes on the floor in order to play it. Now, you know how draw priority works. This unit has draw priority, so you could see it on turn 1. And that means you would need to infuse 4 echoes on turn 1 in order to play this thing. That's a pretty tall order, right? You need to be either drawing a lot of cards with a lot of Ember, or you need to have some kind of an intrinsic lineup in order to achieve that, like an intrinsic Soul Siphon or something. That is a pretty big cost. Spending shards just to play this unit on turn 1? Okay. I mean, it is 1 Ember, fine. It's 4 space. Its card text says Inspire, restore 5 health, whatever, and Revenge, apply Reap 5 to the attacking unit. It has a 0 attack with 200 health. It's got a lot of life. It's a big boy. So it maybe looks good, but so assume you've got this thing lined up with like an intrinsic Soul Siphon, as I mentioned, for 10 pack shards and 10 tons of echo generation, and you look at these stats and this thing, you're like, oh, maybe that's okay. The actual ability on Revenge is just not even as good. You're basically just getting a bad Titan Sentry. Why is it done this way? No one's ever knowing. Who can say? Shiny Shoe, why did you do this to our boy? He looks so cool. Look, he's chubby. Why is he bad? I don't know. You can make this guy work fine. Yeah, he's got 200 life. Cool. So you do play him. He lasts for a while. Fine. And you can do some stupid stuff with his Inspire ability by like putting the Infector Spine Chief behind it and I don't know, taking some, you can abuse some strategies and get this dude up to an absolutely incredible level. So like imagine Glugsider infused with Shardsoul Carver, right? You get that Shardsoul Carver over here, so you get 2 armor. So you get 2 armor and 5 health with every Inspire. You can get like 21 HP in a round. He can actually just like solo the like some combats and some bosses and like the later game, which is kind of hilarious because you kind of soft lock it and then eventually you just kill it with Spine Chief. Pretty funny. It is the true Wurmkin Thunderdome, but you know, it's fine. Regardless of kind of the weird oddities here, this unit's not great. You pay a lot, it's expensive, it's big, and you don't get that much. This is usually something where you've got to load up 3 floors with echoes in order to even achieve the value that you might get from like 2 floors of Titan Sentry just existing. So not excellent. Not excellent. You know, 200 is a big number. I guess that's nice, right? He's a big boy. He looks nice. All right. The next bad unit that I want to hit on, where is he? If we move over here, it is this fellow, Kinhost Carapace. So he's not as bad as you think. The best way I can say this is, you know, he's a decent early game pick to get you through rings 3 and 4. And the best way of thinking about him is he's kind of like a playable Demon Fiend. He's 2 Ember, he's 1 space, but when played, he gains a 10 attack, 10 health, and 1 space per echo. So you imagine playing him at like 4 echoes on a floor. You basically pay 2 Ember for a 5 space unit that has the stats of Demon Fiend, which overflows a floor. Cool. Right? I mean, that's pretty okay. That's going to get you through the early game. It's usually a good don't die kind of situation. But he falls off like a brick off a canyon later in the game. He just has almost no redeemable qualities. He doesn't scale. He takes up too much space once you actually play him with decent stats. You know, the only time this unit can ever really get nuts is if you can somehow get guaranteed to hit like 10 plus echoes on the turn you draw him with something like Cheater's Hand to make sure you have him on the right turn. And it's usually really finicky, and you got to have some like intrinsic frozen channel song, Bog Slime, some other kind of insanity in order to make him good. So, very unfortunate. A mild shout out to his infusion, which is a summon trigger, which means you can do some silly things with Transcend Imp, and you can put this in an egg, and every time the egg dies, or rather every time you play the egg, or the things that come out of the eggs hatch, they get the bonus. It can be kind of good, but not great otherwise. So not a great unit. And the other one that's really not great is another rare unit, Bogdeep Cocoon. So this is the first time we're talking about eggs, so I'm going to talk about hatch and shell real quick. Hatch essentially means that you have shell on this unit. Every time you play an echo, at the end of the turn, it will extract that echo automatically and reduce the count of the shell. Once you reach shell 0, the unit hatches and the dude inside pops out. So if I actually click Bog here, yeah, you can see the Bog Wormling. This is the dude that pops out. He's pretty great. He's got trample and a really strong etch ability and good stats. If you could just play this unit directly, hell yeah, that would be incredible. But you have to play 12 charged echoes on the floor with this cocoon and keep this 0-1 HP unit alive for enough turns that you can do that. With sweep on the divinity on top floor, you're going to have to spend healing and or armor and survivability resources on this dude to keep him alive. And you're probably not going to be able to give him like double multi-strike or something because he only has 1 HP. If he touches anything, he dies. If you give him an offensive scaling infusion and he gains an attack stat, he kills himself on spikes immediately. So it's tough. 12 echoes is a hard ask for a unit that's so weak until it hatches. And even if you can get through it, it wastes your etch triggers early because the cocoon doesn't have this etch ability, and you're probably spending those etches in order to get this thing popping out. So that's pretty tough. The other problem is this thing is 2 Ember and 3 Space. This is a huge amount of floor resources. Like, Ember means that you're spending fewer Ember on actual spells that will infuse the floor, and Space means you can't really do much with this. You've got, like, one other unit on the floor to interact with it. That's pretty tough. Whereas most other eggs start at, like, 1 space. This thing is 3 space. Really, really difficult to use. It wouldn't take much for Shiny Shoe to actually fix this thing. There's a lot of ways you could approach this, pretty much addressing any of its issues. Either its base stat line, its costing, so make it 1 space or something like that, and 1 Ember. That'd be excellent. You could reduce its shell. It doesn't take much to make this dude feel great. You just kind of fix one of these issues, and suddenly this unit is excellent. It does have a silver lining, though. I'll give it this. The unit that pops out, the Bog Wurmling, it is game-winningly strong if you can hatch it in time, and if you can get at least one decent upgrade into it, right? Like a multi-strike. It's basically like Trample Penumbra, but better, right? So that's kind of the way of looking at it. It's a Trample Penumbra that scales and is just better. So yeah. The other thing that's worth noting is there is a relic that interacts with eggs. Where is it? Hardened Hull, right here. When an egg unit is summoned, remove shell 3 and apply 30 armor. That helps a lot, right? We go back over here, we look at our units, and we check out bogs. You give this man 31 HP right away, and you started at shell 9. That's pretty good. It fixes a lot of the problems, and it can become out of control strong. But it's chicken and the egg, right? Taking a preemptive, Hardened Hull and hoping you see an egg, especially, let alone this one, pretty tough. That's pretty risky early on. I mean, because it does nothing until you have an egg, right? And then you're taking Bogdeep Cocoon before you have the Relic. You don't know if you're going to see that. And you might die before you ever do. So it's kind of tough, But if you can line it up with like accelerated incubation and some other stuff, hey, maybe you get a cool run with like 3 of these on a floor and you just blow everything up. So fair enough. Now, I do want to touch on the good units next. We've already lightly talked about some of them. So let me hit on them, and we can kind of move a little bit quickly through them. I'm not going to spend too much time because I still want to talk about the relics and the winning lines after this. But yeah, we're going to start with Shardsoul Carver. So we talked a little bit about this thing and how it's easy to mistake this dude as a bigger Siren of the Sea. But it's important to understand that Inspire can be triggered multiple times per spell cast or per unit of drop, and that changes things a lot because the idea is you're gonna be cultivating your deck down to really slam these Inspire triggers if you're gonna go with this unit. It takes multi-strike well. It has a pretty darn good stat line. 20-30. That's pretty solid for a unit that you're scaling. It's already sort of a good way of thinking about it is it's already, what does that work out to? I think it's 7 incants ahead of Siren of the Sea. So regardless of catching up, it's already just kind of better out the gate. And it's a really good unit, actually. Benefits from infused things being played on the floor. It's just really solid all around. The neat thing is that the armor scaling on this unit is one of the few units, actually, that directly interacts with Symphony of a Soul, which is a spell that has Extract on this clan. I'll pull it up real quick, actually. I know it's going to take me a second to get back here, but if I can go where I just passed it, Symphony of a Soul, extract 5 double buffs and armor on a unit. It's one of the few ways that actually interacts with that, so worth keeping that in mind. You can do some funny things with his survivability. that way. You also have fun times with like Reinforce or whatever from Hellhorned. So it's a surprisingly good tank with good base HP stat, good armor scaling, good for frontlining. Honestly, you can kind of put it in the front, put it in the back, give it multi-strike, give it some scaling defensive plan. It takes infusions really well. It's also got a really good infusion. Whereas, Siren of the Sea, her infusion is +1/+1, which is really slow. This thing is Inspire +2/+2, which is excellent. And all you're really paying for it is one space. And there's a lot of cases when you're in this clan, you don't mind paying that one space, taking like boss relic space, and then just playing a big unit that scales really fast. This infusion into an Animus of Will is extremely strong, for instance, or a sweeper, it's extremely strong. And you're able to get your sweepers and your animus and such up to 3 space. That's okay. You've got like a sentient front line or something. That works. That's 5 space. It scales defense, it scales offense, it starts with 15 HP. It's just really good. I actually really like this infusion into some of the eggs because the eggs themselves will gain the inspire triggers, they gain the tanking from this, and then the attack carries over when they hatch. So it makes them much safer and it lets them scale aggressively. So really good unit. I think it's easy to underestimate it, but don't, right? It's very good. It's a winning line. The next unit I want to hit on is on the next floor. We just talked about it a little bit ago. Keeper of Echoes. So Keeper of Echoes is, Keeper of Echoes is a perfect example of weak alone, strong together. Wurm strong together is the truth of this unit. It applies +1 attack, +1 health to friendly units, the whole floor on Inspire. It's 2 Ember, so it's I guess it's expensive. It's 2 space though, which is nice, and it has 20 HP. 1, it's a really good tank. 2, it's a decent backline, right? Because you can actually inspire this thing to very respectable levels if you put, for example, like Shardsoul Carver in it, or if you have multiple of these things on the floor, then it will scale much faster, right? And the value just goes out of control. Think about like the number of stats that you're getting from 2 to 4 by playing on everything. But like imagine you have like 4 units on your floor, okay? One of these dudes on Inspire will give 2 stats to each one. That's 8. Now imagine 2 of those units are Keepers of Echoes, right? So one of them gives 8. The next one gives 8. And you're now getting 16 stats on the floor. That is really good scaling for one Inspire trigger. One Inspire trigger. Now granted, it's not centralized on one unit. It's spread out. But you can really blast Inspire triggers and make a lot of progress here. So this is very good. You pretty much always want to plan around having at least 2 if you go this line. I pretty strongly encourage you to use the base unit for the AoE effect here, because it loses the AoE effect if you go and take its infusion. And its infusion is not that great. It's like, it's Inspire +1/+1 on the unit itself. It's fine. In an emergency, it's acceptable, but it's not great. I usually prefer to use the unit itself. And then mix this with things like Ascends and Descends, jam a bunch of them on the floor. Sketches of Salvation loves this unit. Play 4 of them on a floor and then drop your champion in and just go crazy. It's actually a very strong line. It's also a really good tank because it has good HP stat. You can put +25 in it. It scales its own HP. Give it some kind of defensive infusion and then give it multi-strike, and it can actually do some damage too, which is pretty cool. Pretty cool. Yeah, I like seeing this with like Infector on Spine Chief or with Corruptor as well, because you can do a lot of very powerful things with it. So the next unit I want to hit on is probably the strongest unit in the clan, the Bog Chrysalis. This is an egg. Eggs are confusing. We already talked about shell and hatch, so I'm not going to hit on them again, but this thing is deceptively strong. It's important to note that when it hatches after playing 5 shell or 5 echoes on the floor, 2 units pop out. The 2 units that pop out are these dudes, Bog Flies. These Bog Flies have a scaling ability with the charged echoes, okay? So that's good. They have like crappy stats, but it's okay because they ramp themselves and are pretty good. Now, the other thing that's important, and I didn't tell you about this when I was talking about the Bogdeep Cocoon, is that upgrades in eggs carry over to hatched units when they hatch. And that means, I'll let you connect the dots for a moment. It means that you get 2 infusions for the price of 1 out of this. It's like a mini Legion of Wax. It's nuts. Imagine something like, I mentioned Shardsoul Carver is a good example. Put Shardsoul Carver in 1, and you then get double value out of that Shardsoul Carver when it hatches, both in survivability and in offense with the plus attack. Pretty much any scaling infusion goes out of control on these. Another good one is Morsel Maker, right? Morsel Maker gives you a +6/+6 on resolve. Just imagine +6/+6 on this plus its own scaling, and it pops out 2. It's so good. It's also 1 space as an egg, 2 space when they hatch, 1 ember. You can very easily slot like 3 of these on a floor and just go crazy. Load out your floor and just get nuts. Another great infusion here, Steel Worker, AoE armor. It's so much survivability that all you have to do is do damage at that point. You cannot lose. It's just nuts. It's hard to emphasize how good this is. If you can imagine a good infusion, it's probably excellent on the Bog Chrysalis. It's just so crazy. And the other important things here are that extinguish triggers fire when an egg hatches. So if you put like an extinguish trigger on this dude, like, I don't know, Bounty Stalker or something, then it will, when it hatches, it will gain that extinguish trigger. The other thing that's useful is if you're doing something like Entombed Explosive, that extinguish trigger not only triggers when it hatches, but also when they die. So you can use them as bombs with Endless. So like, imagine an Endless Bog Chrysalis here with Entombed Explosive. You could hatch it, and then with like an accelerated incubation, and just drop dudes in and do like 150 to a floor. It's not as good as Legion of Wax, but you can do some funny things as long as you can actually hatch it. So it's pretty cool. I'm a big fan. This unit is incredible. Deceptively strong. So all right, the next one I'm going to hit on is this big boy over here, First of Kin. So First of Kin is excellent. I need to emphasize that this unit will keep you alive through Daedalus. It is expensive, 3 space and 3 ember, okay, but it's got a 30-55 stat line. This thing is basically what Demon Fiend wishes it could be. You play this, you play like 2 consume spells, and it solos Talos, right? It just does not care. Give it some survivability, whatever. And it's so strong that it'll carry you out of the early game, and its infusion is just its card text, Etch +5. If you're playing with Echowright or any kind of consume strategy, this is what you're looking for. This thing scales so aggressively. If you can imagine having enough spells or that consume in your deck, it scales at like 2.5 times the rate of something like Siren of the Sea for offense, which is just nuts. Just out of control strong. And yeah, there's really not much else to say here. This dude is just solid. Really good early game, really good scaling late game, excellent infusion, plays nice with anything that wants to play a lot of consume spells. The end. Not much to say here. Cool. All right. The next guy, I didn't even give that guy a lot of time because there's really not much to say here. He's just excellent. So the next one we're hitting on is Kinhost Vessel. This is the other egg that we haven't hit on yet. It is similarly 1 space, 1 ember. It is Shell 8, so it is the mid-range one, and it summons this dude called Kinhost Pupa, which is up here. He is a 30 times 2 with 10 HP and 20 armor, so it comes with multi-strike, and it also applies Reap to the floor when it strikes. And it's easy to underestimate this dude, but in a lot of ways, it's the same thing as Bog Chrysalis, right? Whereas Bog Chrysalis pops out 2 infusions, right? So you get 2 units that have summon triggers or whatever. The Kinhost Vessel, the Pupa dude, pops out with a multi-strike, which means that immediately you're getting extra value from whatever you're doing. A great example of a successful infusion here is put like Shadow Siege into it. It's pretty hilarious. This dude pops out doing like 160 damage with like 100 HP net when you hatch it, and all for like 3 space when you play it initially, which is just crazy. And then its stat line is just so solid. That's just a good example of it. There's other things you could do as well, like scaling well. Like you could put First of Kin's Essence, 5 Etch into Kinhost Pupa, and then once you hatch it, then you can just drop it out and it has that multi-strike by default. Very good. And 8 shell is manageable. 8, it's a little large, but it's fine. The payoff here is that you get a unit with really solid stat line coming out. Just 30 damage, 30 HP, 20 of it being armor, comes out with multi-strike. It's just a solid guy. Many a run of mine has been won off the back of like 2 of these hatched behind some kind of a tank with some kind of a scaling infusion inside of it, and just feels pretty solid. So not much else to say there. And the last unit I want to hit on here is Glareminder. So yeah, Okay. It says sweep on the card. It's a rare unit. It says sweep. It's impossible for it to be bad. No unit that says sweep is bad. So all of the rules apply here that apply to any other sweeper, right? Put an Alpha Fiend inside of it. Great. Just hit every unit, give it quick, give it multi-strike, destroy the world. Make like 3 of them, fine. You just kill everything. Okay, cool. Give it a tank. Wonderful. Your run is over. There's a lot of examples of what you can do here. Again, you can give this some kind of very beefy, big stat stick and give it quick multi-strike, dupe it 3 times, just kill everything. It's good, right? It's good. It'll get there. Basically, it's really good with anything that makes sweepers broken, which is a lot of things. So it's really hard to say it's bad. It has to be good by default. I do think that sweep in general restricts this unit's ability because, Etch trigger, I didn't even mention it once. It says Etch apply Reap 2 to enemy units. I feel like they were really leaning into some kind of like quote unquote spellcaster type unit here where they wanted it to Etch in order to trigger a lot of Reap on the floor, but because it has sweep, it just sucks. It doesn't have the support it needs within itself in order to feel good. Like if this thing had like an inspire trigger instead of the sweep to apply more reap or whatever, it would be excellent. So, but it is what it is. Just says sweep, it'll have to do. And that's all of the banner units. I did mention Bog Flies loosely when we talked about Bog Chrysalis. This is a common pack similar to like a draft. It's pretty rare I take them. Its infusion is just its card text with 5 HP, so kind of whatever. It is free, so okay, that's neat. Basically, Bogfly is like the bad version of the Bog Chrysalis. Just take the Chrysalis if you see it. It can be okay, though. This thing is a decent card in the early game because you can scale it up to like 25 attack. And at 25-5, it does some work into those rings 1 through 3 bosses. So it's fine. It's not great, but it's fine. I've kind of shied away from it in recent days, but it can do some work in the beginning of the game if you need it to. So those are all the units. I don't really have much else to say there. We're gonna go over an hour on this video. There's just no way around it. I guess there's just a lot to talk about when you're covering a whole clan, huh? It is what it is. Let's not waste time though. I am gonna touch on relics next. Yeah, let's move on to relics. So up front, I'm just going to tell you that basically every Wurmkin relic is nuts. They're just so good, and they synergize with themselves and the clan to an extreme degree. Generally speaking, when you're Wurmkin, artifact trials on rings 4 through 5 are extremely worth it if you can reasonably take them, because you have a good chance of just hitting the nuts, right? I'm going to briefly kind of look at them and then just give you an idea of what I think each one's good for. But it's going to be pretty quick because they're pretty self-explanatory. All right, base charge. At the start of battle, you get 2 charged echoes on every floor. Excellent with reap strategies, right? Because it just loads your floor out. This also helps for things like Glugsider or extract costs in general, making you able to play things immediately on turn 1. It's very cozy, feels excellent, hard to say no. Just give me 2 echoes on every floor. Excellent. Bog Slime is probably one of the strongest relics in this clan. It's essentially double inspire triggers. So it's also one of the few things that integrates the 2 sides of this clan together fairly decently, right? So when you consume a spell, you gain 1 charged echo on that floor that you consume the spell. And if you imagine, your consume spell might itself be infused, right? So now you have taken your consume spell with infuse from generating 1 echo to generating 2 echoes, which essentially doubles your inspire triggers, right? So in a lot of ways, this is kind of like your founding seal for a specific type of card that you're probably already going to be playing a lot of in the clan. So it's amazing, and you know how strong Founding Seal is, so yeah. And you can actually do something with these echoes, right? So this is actually better than Founding Seal, because not only does it give you an extra Inspire trigger, that doubles the rate at which you're gaining the ability to employ like extract abilities or something, or scaling for things like Corrupt or Spine Chief or whatever. So it's just excellent. This next relic is also amazing. When a card with Extract is played, gain 1 Ember and 1 Charged Echo. Oh boy, where do I start? You can just go infinite on energy with this because almost all of the Extract cards are free or cost 1 Ember or something. And so not only does this generate Ember for you, it refunds one of the echoes that you spend on an extract card. So imagine like Echo Infusion with an infusion on it. It will inspire when you play it because it's infused. It takes away one echo. It then gives you an ember and gives you an echo back. So not only does this serve as double inspire triggers for anything that says extract, it just gives you energy. It's unbelievably good. This relic is just so strong if you have anything that says the word extract in your deck. So unbelievably good. Decayed Decoy, you just do one more reap whenever you apply reap. That's good, right? There's an inspire path on the Spine Chief that applies reap. You love to see Decayed Decoy, very strong. Fracture applies 2 reap. It goes to 3. It's like a 50% increase. The card becomes crazy strong at killing heavies when it goes to 3. You just play a bunch of reap cards on an enemy and just kill them forehead. So it's excellent. And I'm going to jump ahead to another relic that synergizes directly with this in kind of an obscene way. I'm going to skip a few around. So we jump ahead to Serrated Mandibles. When one or more echoes are added to a floor, apply Reap 1 to a random enemy unit twice. So Reap 1 is a lot of damage because you could have like 8 echoes on the floor, so that's 8, right? And you do it twice, so you have a pretty good shot of hitting backlines or something important, or your boss or whatever. Now, remember we just talked about the Decayed Decoy. That makes this Reap 2. If this thing's putting out 4 reap just when you play an echo on a floor, and note the language, when 1 or more, so if your thing applies like 3 at once, then you're not going to get it. And that's to kind of keep this from cascading out of control. But you can get it if it's got like 3 from multiple different sources, right? So like when your card is infused, you get 1 trigger of Mandibles. But if your card is infused and you have and you have Carving Corusca, and your card says extract, you get the 1 when you say infused, and then there's actually a time delay and a trigger delay before it fires the Corusca, and so you get more Mandibles triggers. The combination of Mandibles with Decayed Decoy is crazy damage, and it's easy to underestimate it. This thing can just kill heavies on its own, just in your relic, and then you just kind of like play echoes and win game forehead. It's just unbelievable. Dun Echo is the next one we'll hit on. 1 additional card in each draft pack will be infused. You hate to see it late in the game. You see this at the Ring 8 artifact shop, and you just kind of laugh at it because it's terrible. But you see this in the starting relic choice, and it's game-winning. Just get every card you want to be infused, right? You know, it gives you a lot more options, and almost everything in the clan wants you to do something with echoes. So it's just good early on. It's worth noting that it's great, but it doesn't give you power early on. It's not like an early take from a power perspective. It's an early take from like a build your deck to be stronger eventually perspective. So, okay. Echo Seedling is possibly one of the strongest relics in the game. It says the first time each battle a card with Consume is played, add 2 copies to your hand. Just think with me a moment about how strong a consume card can be on turn 1. And now imagine that you can give it intrinsic. And now imagine that you could upgrade it with other stuff. And now imagine that when you play it, you just get 2 copies for free. They just get manifested out of the Aether, and then they go into your consume pile. And now imagine you can bring all of these copies back. And it is out of control. This relic is like... Okay, let me put this in perspective. Let's say you have a consume spell, okay? Your consume spell is infused. Okay. So that means it's generating 1 echo. Neat. Your consume spell, I don't know, you got it down to 0 ember. Sure, why not? Now let's say you have Bog Slime. Okay, so Bog Slime. Now that's great, that's excellent. Your consume spell now has 2 echoes that it generates. Now imagine that you have Echo Seedling, and your 1 spell that you drop out, regardless of what the card text even says on it, it does not even matter. It now pops out 2 copies. So on that first turn, you not only get 3 copies of your powerful consume spell, you get 6 inspire triggers out of the gate. This is how you pull off the Kinhost Carapace miracle where you drop this dude at like 80/80, right? This is how you drop Glugsider on turn 1. This is how you just etch 3 times and inspire 6 times out of the gate. And this is why you can't compare Incant cleanly to Inspire, because you don't have this kind of a relic for Incant. You don't have that kind of a multiplier where you cast 1 spell and suddenly you get 6 triggers on your ability. No, you don't get that. This is nutty. You see this with some kind of like consume importance like deck, and you just go crazy. A great example is this makes Bogdeep Cocoon playable, because what if you have an intrinsic accelerated incubation? Right? You play your worm on top floor, you play accelerated incubation up there, it pops out 2 copies, you play it 2 more times, and you know what that means? You've removed 9 shell on turn 1 for 0 ember. That's nuts. If that accelerated incubation was infused, that means you hatch that thing on turn 1. And you have solved the crisis of the Bogdeep Cocoon, and now your unit is God mode and will hatch, and then you can scale it, and it just goes out of control. This is crazy. Anyway, moving on. Encased Divinity. At the start of battle, the top floor gains an unremovable charged echo. It's just really good. If you set up top floor with an unremovable charged echo, you can just freely extract and you don't care at all. Like if you have an infused echo transfer that costs 2 extract and you have Encased Divinity, you can just play it without any other echoes on your floor. Yeah, just free extract cards. Seems fair. 0 cost, 0 extract because you have this thing and it's infused, and it gives you 15 attack. That's unbelievable. Put that thing on holdover. That's more attack scaling that you would get from any infused ability, and you just win off of whatever you're putting that into. We already briefly talked about Hardened Hull, but this lets you do some wacky things with eggs. This lets you do reform eggs and endless eggs very well, because you just drop this egg and it has like 2 or 5 shell then, and you just dump some echoes on the floor and go crazy. If the egg itself happens to be infused, then more power to you, because it gives itself the echo. And the armor 30 is amazing because it means that you can take another offensive infusion into your like Bogdeep Cocoon or your Kinhost vessel, because they have good stats on their own once they hatch. And the only problem is they die before they hatch. So this is an excellent relic, if not a really niche, right? It's only good if you have an egg. It's useless otherwise, but it's really, really, really good if you have an egg strategy. So, Mind Hoard. You know, Mind Hoard says increase the echo slots by 1 on each floor. This relic might be the weakest of all of their relics, and it's still amazing, because being able to store 5 on all floors, that helps with reap, that helps with lining up the shell. So maybe you can load up a floor before you get to play your egg, and then it gets to pull everything down once you play it. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with this. This also means that you can plan around the larger extract values, the extract 5, extract 6 cards a lot cleaner, because you can, charge up the floor 5, and then all you have to do is play 1 echo to play an extract 6, and you're cozy. So even though this is not the strongest relic, it's like the weakest of all their relics. It's still great. Notice Stone says, and it's the last one, when a card with Consume is played, all cards gain +1 magic power for the rest of this battle. It's easy to underestimate this, but in an Etch deck, this goes out of control very quickly. You can get to the point where you're playing like 6 or 7 Consume spells a turn, and this is uncapped, right? So 7 magic power every turn can convert your Ice Storm into like a 500 damage nuke very fast. Or it can make your Echo Breaks just hit for like 80 damage or something after enough turns have passed. And if your random 1-cost attacks are doing that much, you're cruising. And this also makes attuned cards just unbelievable. This is easy to underestimate, but it's also only good if you're consuming a lot. So, yeah, just compare this to like where is it? Tempered Talisman, which is +3 magic power. You only have to consume 3 spells with Notice Stone to match it. After that, it's just free. It's just better. Like, this thing just dumps all over Tempered Talisman in like an unbelievable way. So, yeah, that is Wurmkin in a nutshell. Their relics are unbelievably strong, and you can do some absolutely crazy things by leaning into one of their strategies like Inspire or something. Just hit some good relics. Any of these will do. Almost any of them solve your problems, and just go crazy. Just go crazy. It's just excellent. All right, that's everything that's kind of introductory about Wurmkin. Now I want to talk about winning lines. So I'm gonna I'm gonna specifically choose a few with each champion that I think are really good, and it's easy for this to take a lot of time, I think. So I think I'm going to be a little bit brief on each one, but I do still want to give them each the due diligence. So we're going to start with not Echowright, but Spine Chief. What are some good lines? The first is Reap Chief. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but the Decayer is a very powerful path. Basically, you're looking for a Decayer start that has non-units as your secondary clan, so no default melting, no exile Hellhorn. You don't want the imps, you don't want the dregs, and any of the other ones are functional for this. You're answering a few questions with this chief. It's extremely strong at killing every enemy in the game. It's very bad at staying alive, 1, and winning relentless, 2. You can cheese out most flying bosses like Seraph, Talos, or Arcus or whatever by just blowing them up with Reap when they're on the floor, having good turns like that. But it's not going to work on the Divinity because the Divinity removes Reap every turn. And it's not going to work on the non-flying bosses because you only get 1 turn with them there, and you're probably not going to be able to infuse enough to kill them. So, generally speaking, you're looking for the answer to those 2 questions. You basically cultivate your deck down over the course of the run to only infused cards, only things that trigger Inspire. You want nothing else. You remove the bad stuff. And then you want to answer, how do I keep it alive? It could be healing, it could be armor, it could be have a big tank in front that can survive, maybe an endless tank, for instance. It could be whatever, right? And then you need to have an answer for relentless. It could be relentless on another floor, like, I don't know, you're buffing up a Steel Singer up top, and this thing's just going to beat the crap out of the Divinity. Totally works, by the way. You just use the Decayer to kill everything on the bottom floor with a tank in front of it, and then you have Steel Singer just destroying the world up top. Totally works, as an example. Other things that can work, just any kind of upstairs scaling, right? That is non-reliant on Inspire triggers, because if you're splitting your triggers across floors, you might not get enough to clear waves. So, worth keeping that in mind. You can always kind of measure your strength with a given run by how much damage you're doing to the Divinity before it goes relentless. An average inspired chief run like this will hit around 2,000 to 2,500 damage on the Divinity before Relentless goes, which means you just kind of have to answer the rest of this HP bar in Relentless somehow on some floor. Could be anything. You have so many options for that. So it could be on the Chief's floor, right? You could have like a Siren behind it with some kind of like survivability Guardian Stone or Lodestone Totem or something on the floor in order to keep it alive. And then it just wins because Relentless with a Siren. Duh, you win. So it's pretty straight line. Some good examples of it. I mentioned that the Siren choice. Another example of one that I really like is you maybe have Awoken as a secondary with like a holdover infused Unleash the Wildwood, and then you just have some kind of regen stacking something on another floor. Very clean. You could do that with something on the floor itself, if that relies on Inspire triggers, like a Shardsoul Carver, for instance, by taking space, sticking it behind or in front, all the same. You could do it with Keeper of Echoes, too. Keeper of Echoes is a good double tank or backline. You could have 2 of them on the floor, take 7 space, go crazy. I usually wouldn't do that because you need to draw a lot of Inspire triggers, but you could, depending on what relics you see and things like that. So that works pretty well. That's the Reap Chief path. It's very strong. It wins. The next is the Corruptor line. Corruptor plays a lot like Firelight Little Fade in that you just want to maximize the number of hits on your floor. The easiest line here is, I don't know, you've got like Light's Gift so enemies don't attack. You set up top. You've got a Bog Chrysalis infused with a Bog Chrysalis and some way of dazing Divinity. And this thing then loads your floor up with Bog Flies. They all have multi-strike or something. And you just pump echoes into it and you kill the Divinity in like 2 turns. Like that, it's just so strong. You basically need to answer the question of this thing has terrible HP, only 100. It's 3 space, so you need to find a way to jam multiple things behind it in order to get those multi strikes in via, ascending, eggs, whatever. And yeah, yeah, that's it. This is also really good with melting, just in general. You can hit hallowed halls and just reform your whole floor multiple times to add survivability and echoes in and just go completely mad with power. It's very effective in that respect. So, yeah, very nice. Yeah, let's see. Anything else I want to say about this one? Yeah, typically this unit is forced to tank just because it's big and it has more HP than the units you put behind it. So you probably do want to answer survivability in a really good way. So keep that in mind as well. But yeah, you can do some really stupid things with this path that I actually really love. One thing I did once upon a time was multi-strike into a welder helper, and I just played welder helper behind it. And I think I gave quick to the welder helper. So it was like, what the heck was it? I don't remember. It had, no, it was like, it might have been like quick endless welder helper. It was stupid. Anyway, the welder helper did something like 300 damage and attack. So it was my backline and it gave me armor. I think I might have dazed the divinity or something. I don't know. It wasn't on the channel. It was before I started recording, but you can do some really silly things. You can literally use morsels as damage. You can stick like morsel maker in the back and it creates morsels, and then the morsels do like 200 damage and attack. It actually works. You can do something like multi-strike on a totem, like a guardian stone or whatever, which answers survivability and damage. Because it doesn't matter if the enemy does, if your attacker does 1 damage baseline, right, or 0. You're going to add like 160 with Spine Chief. You just need hits. That's it. So it's really excellent, actually. And then sometimes you're in just like a setup that cannot take one of these other ones I just talked about. So you can always play Infector and go all in on Infector and just play Inspire triggers. All you have to do is keep it alive, which is, a very common problem with this chief, as you might imagine, and just get to Relentless somehow. Use your other clan to get to Relentless, kill things with spells, whatever you got to do, and put Inspire triggers on your floor. Like, a great example of this is like Horned Warrior, right? You have a Horned Warrior, stick Shardsoul Carver in it, and then just infuse the hell out of your floor. And that thing is going to blow up heavies as long as you can keep Chief alive, and it wins Relentless cleanly because it's getting armor scaling and attack scaling in Relentless. So, yeah, pretty straightforward. I don't really have to mention a lot about this. It's definitely not as strong as the other ones because Infector's kind of weird, and if you miss Inspire triggers on your run, it can be really bad, especially because it doesn't get strike triggers until there are enemies on the floor, right? So while they're ascending on the first 2 turns, you get nothing. It can be kind of tough. It can be kind of tough. It's not ideal, but it is a winning line, so I am mentioning it in the case you have to go that route. So, and cool. That's about as much as I'm going to say about Chief. Some winning lines there. Let's head over to Echowright now. And let's talk about the classic Echowright lines. There's 2 I want to bring up here. You have the Shellsmith 2 Repeater 1 line, where you go Armor 8 on Etch to the floor with Resolve, return a random consume spell to your hand. And basically all you're looking for here is cheap, good consume spells, and this answers 1 Etch triggers and 2 survivability. And the rest of it is just use literally any other clan's damage scaling plan. I've done runs like this with 2 sirens in the back, with a Shellsmith in front, and I'm just tanking with Shellsmith and etch triggers and just etching a whole bunch. Maybe you stick like a First of Kin infusion in the sirens, it wins. It goes mad with power. That's great. You've got other options too. Like, there's just so many. A sweeper behind it, right? All you have to do is scale the sweeper by some means. It could be Etch, it could be Inspire, it could be whatever. Incant, who knows? And all you do is you just use Shellsmith as the ultimate beefcake It can tank top floor Divinity. It can tank waves. It doesn't care. As long as you cultivate your deck to a point where you're etching a lot. That's really it. This is also the strongest line for what I like to call the quote unquote etch onslaught strategy. So imagine you have 5 very good, cheap consume spells that you play to scale your floor offensively or defensively, or both. And now imagine you have 1 copy of 0 cost Wurmkin etchings. Your every turn basically looks like play 5 consume spells, play Wurmkin etchings to put those 5 consume spells on top of your deck, and then repeater 1 returns the Wurmkin etchings to your hand. This means you get 6 etch triggers per turn, 6 incants per turn, all the value of 6 consume spells. And consume spells typically are pretty strong, right? Imagine if one of them is like reinforce or something at 1 cost. Like, that's unbelievable. You just have 999 armor by like turn 4 or something. And, you know, bonus points if your scaling the offensive plan has etch synergies like First of Kin or whatever, right? I mean, it's not even required, but it still just goes mad with power. It's unbelievable. So Shellsmith 2, Repeater 1, very strong. Now, the next one I want to talk about is it is viable to go Repeater 3 for returning 2 random consume spells to your hand. You can do some pretty crazy things here, but you have to understand that Repeater 1 is extremely bad in the early game if you don't have a consume start. Normally, I won't take it unless I have something like Shelter in my opener, because if you have that, then you're great, right? Or if you start with something like Trader's Quill, right? Trader's Quill with like a Space Prism can totally carry you through the early game. You just repeat that Space Prism every turn, and even though it doesn't do anything really, it just gives you space, it's still a big nuke to that heavy, and it just kills a bunch of stuff. So you can get through that. You need to be worrying about the early game if you go Repeater 1 in the beginning. But if you're starting with Repeater 1, you really want to go Repeater 3 for that big payout. And this can do some fun things. Imagine like you have eggs on your floor. You can double repeat accelerated incubation and just play those every turn until your things hatch. You could do this with endless eggs. It's just silly. It goes out of control very quickly. It is possible to not die and take a Hail Mary start with Repeater if you have something like Advanced Prototype to carry early on, and then just rely on drafting something good in rings 1 and 2, but you'll have to weigh your start appropriately in order to know if that's reasonable. So, and there is Marshlord. Marshlord, you can't lose the early game. It's very safe. You have an egg that pops out with a lot of life. You hatch it. You have 2 dudes that pop out with a lot of life. They do good damage. You'll be fine. It'll carry you through the early game. There is the winning line here of you see a Bogdeep Cocoon in your run, you put it behind a Marshlord, you hatch it in like 1 turn, and then you have 2 Bogdeep Cocoon Bog Wurmlings on your floor, right? 2 little hatched buddies, and you just etch the hell out of your floor. And it works, right? You put like Quick or Multi-Strike into the other one. Maybe you see Hardened Hull, and your egg line just kind of wins. But yeah, I'm not going to go into some of the nuances of Marshlord here, but there are some of them, and you'll probably run into them while doing that lineup. But it is functional. I normally don't commit all the way to Marshlord 3 because, it summons a Bogdeep Cocoon, which has 3 space, whereas the other 2 will only be 1 space. You could do something like Marshlord 2 Repeater 1 or Marshlord 2 Shellsmith 1. It's fine. It mixes pretty well if you want to go that route, so it's pretty cool. And the last kind of winning line I want to pull up is not champion related. I'm going to go back to the units. You can kind of mix and match almost anything into a solid other line, right? If you're some other clan's champion and you want to just kind of lean into that, you've got a lot of really good options for infusions or units to support. You've got eggs, we talked about them. You've got the Shardsoul Carver, which is solid. You've got Keeper of Echoes, which is really cool and can do some fun stuff. Those 3, like the Bog Chrysalis, or 4 rather, Bog Chrysalis, Kinhost Vessel, Shardsoul Carver, and Keeper of Echoes, are all really good hits for most runs, and they'll get you there. The other ones, maybe not so much, but like Glareminder's fine, right? See sweep, find way of making sweep broken, win game. Pretty classic strategy in the DLC, so there's nothing really specific I'm going to call out there because there's so much variability in that, but these units are the ones you're really looking for if you're thinking, okay, I have to take a Wurmkin banner. I'm looking for one of those in order to kind of fix my problems. So, and that's usually what I would do. Yeah, I mean, Shardsoul Carver is probably the classic example for this, right? Shardsoul Carver into literally anything that does damage. It could be a sweeper, like a Shattered Shell or whatever, and then you just stick it behind Sentient. That's 5 space. It scales life. It scales attack. It kills enemies. It win. Yeah, I mean that does it, right? So yeah, that is everything on the winning lines I want to call attention to here. So okay, there's that. The next thing I want to hit on are probably, I think, two of the biggest weaknesses, or not weaknesses, but typical mistakes I see people make while playing Wurmkin that I want to draw attention to. So I've been talking this whole time about how there are two sides of this clan. Now, outside of a few relics or cards, the consume side of Wurmkin interacts very weakly with the echo manipulation side of Wurmkin. I mentioned like Bog Slime or cards like Return Soul are very good to kind of bridge that gap somewhat, but typically these two do not play together very well. You're pretty unlikely to go Etch unless you're already going all the way on consumes. You're pretty unlikely to go Inspire unless you're cultivating your deck to a ton of Inspire triggers and infused cards. So you need to be careful with that. Mixing these two is usually very risky and is probably going to result in you drafting things that you don't want to see or that slow you down and that kill you. So you can obviously win some of these due to like an insane mix in a few runs here or there. But if you're looking for consistency and win streaks, pick one line early enough that you can kind of decide to pivot around it and just stick to it, right? Just plan around it. If you're going echo manipulation, you want to have a bunch of inspire triggers. If you are going, etch, you want to have a bunch of consume cards that you're just blasting and throwing out. And speaking of etch, I want to talk about the next mistake that I see people make on this clan a lot. Very regularly, I see recommendations from folks to just play anything that says consume. And while you can do that, and it might sound good, remember how much of the strength of the consume manipulation comes from things like Repeater, which only returns 1 or 2 spells, or Wurmkin etchings, which returns 5, or Broken Memories, which returns 1, right? You get a fixed number of spells that consume that you're really interacting with. And if you just send it on casting anything that says consume, or you take cards, let me pull one up, or you take a card like, where is this thing? Total Recall is what I want to draw attention to. Where are you? Here you are, Total Recall, which just draws 3 random spells from your discard pile and gives them consume. This just blasts a bunch of trash into your consume pile. And the last thing you really want to be bringing back with your repeater is like a 1 damage echo break that says consume. That's really depressing. Not only does it cost 1 ember, it does virtually nothing for you other than etch. And you then run into the scenario where you can never play that card again because it says consume and it messes you up. So you can really slow yourself down and hurt yourself if you are spamming bad consume spells. I see this all the time. You want to cultivate your consume pile as much as any other part of your deck so that you're only playing the best stuff, the creme de la creme, whenever you can. And you're always bringing back the good thing. And obviously, Wurmkin etchings or Broken Memories add extra layers, right? You can bring back, you can cast Broken Memories on a thing, and then it will bring back Broken Memories, giving you a second etch trigger, right? It's kind of like cascading double value. Wurmkin etchings lets you get a lot more fancy. In an etch return kind of scenario, you can now play 5 spells, and then you play Wurmkin etchings, and you return the Wurmkin etchings. Fun. Or if you have Repeater 2, you could have like 10 spells and just go real ham, right? And then you just play 10 things or however much you can draw, really, and then you just have 2 consume Wurmkin etchings in your pile, and it brings them both back at the end of the day. And you can do some really fun stuff there. So those are probably the 2 biggest mistakes I see people make in terms of actually playing it. The other one, the last one, is not appreciating the strength of the clan where it is. I don't think the clan is incredible. It's not the strongest clan right now, in my opinion. Not even close, but it's good. It's in the top 3 for sure. It's definitely not the worst, but it is the most complex, the hardest to understand. And so that can really scare people. People make bad decisions, they mix and match, or they just take bad units. They think maybe this is okay and I don't understand it, and they kill themselves very quickly. This is obviously something that beginners will struggle with more. If you're listening to this and you're trying to do like C25 win streaks, you probably already know which units are bad, which units are good, but the important thing is that don't get baited into the bad units because they might be okay. It's an easy way to kind of send your run a little bit early just because you think you might be able to make a line, and if you miss it, then you lose, right? Just go for what's the safe victory, right? Pick the cards that are good, win the game, right? So that's essentially, I think, everything I had to say in this video, which is pretty exciting. So I don't have too much to say in the closeout here, other than I think that Wurmkin is a better clan than most people give it credit for, and I really enjoy playing it, and I think it really is a winning line that is very strong. It has a lot of options. The champions are both excellent. On a scale from like S tier being auto win and D tier being I never want to play this champion, both of them rank A tier to my opinion because they have so many good lines. It's hard to find a bad path. You always have a solution to your run just from your start. And it's excellent. It's just excellent. So even if you're playing Wurmkin primary, no problems there. You love seeing those champions. If you're playing them secondary, you have good hits for scaling offensive lines, defensive lines. You have a lot of options. There are good units, even if they're a little expensive. You just kind of play around it, right? And it works out for you. So give them a second chance, and hopefully you kind of find the line there, right? So yeah, that's everything I've got to say here. It is an hour and a half, the longest guide by a lot, but there's a lot to talk about when you're talking about a clan. So I think there's really no way I could have shortened this down to a more meaningful, like shorter point. There's just so much to say, way more than my other videos. So it is what it is. Hopefully it's not too long for you, but I don't think I'm going to be doing another full clan review like this unless, I don't know, somehow everyone forgets how to play Stygian or something. So we'll see. Anyway, as always, if there's an elusive topic you'd like me to talk about in a future guide, let me know in a comment. And thanks a lot for sticking it out to the end here. I really appreciate it. I always appreciate your time. Stay tuned for what's next. Take care, folks.